Gunfire shattered the baccarat crystal chandelier, raining sharp diamonds across a pristine marble floor. Beatrice did not run. 250 pounds of sheer, trembling determination, she gripped a heavy brass fireplace poker and stepped squarely in front of New York's most feared syndicate boss. Across the smoking room, a rival Russian oligarch chuckled, raising his customized Glock. He expected the maid to beg. Instead, Vincent Castellano, a ruthless man who hadn't shown mercy in a decade, roared 5 words that changed underworld history forever. "Get your hands off her!" In the sprawling, high-stakes world of the New York Mafia, power is measured in fear, and survival is measured in paranoia. But at the Castellano estate, a 40-acre fortress sitting on the jagged coastline of Oyster Bay, Long Island, survival for Beatrice Gallagher was measured in invisibility. Beatrice was 28, stood 5'6", and weighed 250 pounds. In a house frequented by the city's most dangerous men and their impossibly thin, cosmetically enhanced wives draped in Valentino and Gucci, Beatrice was a ghost. She wore a tailored black-and-white uniform from Staffordshire Placements, the elite domestic agency that staffed the homes of billionaires and criminals alike. To the ruthless men who occupied the estate's mahogany-paneled rooms, her size made her part of the furniture. She was unthreatening. She was overlooked. She was just the fat maid, and that was her greatest advantage, because nobody lowered their voice when Beatrice was dusting the bookshelves. Nobody stopped discussing the illegal weapon shipments coming through the port of Newark, or the bribes being funneled to local judges when Beatrice was pouring their black ivory coffee. She knew the Castellano family's secrets better than the FBI. She knew that Paulie Gatto, the volatile underboss, had a secret gambling addiction draining the family's offshore accounts. She knew that the security cameras in the West Wing had a blind spot near the Rose Gardens. Most importantly, she knew Vincent Castellano. Vincent was not a man who inspired warmth. At 34, he had inherited the Castellano crime family after a violent coup left his father dead on the pavement outside Peter Luger Steakhouse. Vincent was a phantom of a man, cold, calculating, and possessing a terrifying stillness. He wore custom Brioni suits, drank 18-year-old Macallan neat, and spoke so quietly that his subordinates had to lean in to hear their own death sentences. To the rest of the staff, Vincent was a monster to be avoided. But Beatrice noticed the things everyone else was too terrified to see. She noticed how he rubbed his left shoulder when a storm was blowing in off the Long Island Sound, a lingering phantom pain from a bullet he took 5 years prior. She noticed that he never slept more than 3 hours a night, often pacing the library until dawn. And she noticed that he was the only man in the entire estate who actually looked her in the eye when he spoke to her. He never called her sweetheart or girl like the capos did. He called her Beatrice. "The coffee is perfect, Beatrice," he had murmured one rainy Tuesday, his dark eyes meeting hers over the rim of a bone china cup. He hadn't smiled. Vincent never smiled. But the genuine acknowledgement had sent a strange, electric jolt straight to her chest. She had simply nodded, her cheeks burning, and retreated to the kitchen. She knew better than to harbor fantasies. Women who looked like her didn't get the billionaire mob boss. They cleaned up his messes, but the messes at the Castellano estate were about to turn deadly. A brutal turf war had been simmering for months between Vincent and the Ivanov Bratva, a ruthless Russian syndicate led by Roman Ivanov. Roman was a brute force of nature, an ex-Spetsnaz operative who wanted control of Castellano's union contracts in Manhattan. The tension had turned Oyster Bay into a pressure cooker. Guards from Academy, an elite private security firm, patrolled the perimeter with tactical rifles. The estate felt less like a home and more like a bunker. Despite the heightened security, Beatrice felt a creeping sense of dread. She had survived her rough childhood in South Boston by trusting her gut, and lately her gut was screaming. Things in the house were shifting. Small things. The rotation of the guards changed without notice. The heavy iron gates at the front of the property were sometimes left off their electronic locks for minutes at a time. Beatrice tried to convince herself it was just the stress of the impending annual Castellano Charity Gala, a massive, lavish event designed to launder the family's public image. But the shadows in the estate were growing longer, and Beatrice, the invisible woman who saw everything, was about to step directly into the line of fire. The night of the gala, the Oyster Bay estate was transformed into a glittering facade of high society elegance. Over 300 guests filled the grand ballroom, a sea of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, while politicians clinked champagne glasses with the very mobsters who funded their campaigns. Down in the massive industrial kitchen, the atmosphere was chaotic. The catering had been contracted out to a high-end firm in Manhattan. Beatrice was stationed near the service elevators, managing the flow of silver platters being rushed upstairs. The heat was stifling, and her uniform clung to her back, her thick thighs chafing as she hurried between the walk-in refrigerator and the staging tables. It was around 10:30 p.m. when Beatrice noticed the anomaly. A team of 4 new servers had just come through the rear loading dock, carrying crates of fresh ice and supplementary champagne. They were dressed in the same crisp white jackets as the rest of the catering staff. They kept their heads down, moving with efficient, practiced speed. But as one of the men brushed past her, Beatrice looked down. Kitchen staff, regardless of the catering company, wore slip-resistant shoes, usually cheap black clogs or rubber-soled sneakers. The floor was always slick with spilled water, grease, or dropped food. But the man who had just walked past her was wearing standard-issue, matte black tactical boots, the kind with reinforced steel toes and deep treads designed for gripping asphalt, not polished marble. Beatrice frowned, wiping the sweat from her forehead. She watched as the 4 men bypassed the main staging area entirely. Instead of grabbing trays of hors d'oeuvres, they slipped silently toward the narrow servants' corridor, a passageway that led directly to the private elevators, which in turn led to Vincent's secluded 3rd-floor study. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She immediately looked around for Paulie Gatto, who was supposed to be supervising the kitchen security checkpoint. She found him leaning against a stainless steel prep table, laughing on his cell phone, a thick cigar clamped between his teeth. Beatrice approached him, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Gatto," she said, keeping her voice low. Paulie didn't even look at her. He held up a manicured finger, signaling her to wait while he finished his joke on the phone. Yeah, tell the judge the envelope is in the glove box," he barked into the receiver before snapping the phone shut. He finally looked at Beatrice, his eyes dropping briefly to her waistline with a look of undisguised disdain. "What is it, Betty? We run out of the chocolate cake already?" Beatrice swallowed the humiliation. "It's Beatrice. And no. 4 of the catering staff just went up the servants' corridor. They aren't carrying food, and they're wearing tactical boots. I think they're armed." Paulie rolled his eyes, letting out a heavy, patronizing sigh. "Listen to me, Nancy Drew. Academy has a 60-man perimeter outside. Nobody gets in who isn't supposed to be here. Those guys are probably just hauling the extra liquor up to the VIP lounge. Go back to washing the dishes, or whatever it is you do before I dock your pay." He turned his back on her, completely dismissing the warning. Beatrice stood frozen for a second. The instinct drilled into her for years told her to put her head down, keep her mouth shut, and do her job. It wasn't her place. It wasn't her world. If these men wanted to kill each other, she shouldn't care. But then she thought of Vincent. She thought of the exhausted, haunted look in his eyes when he drank his coffee in the morning. She thought of the fact that he was the only person in this God-forsaken house who treated her like a human being. Vincent was upstairs in his study. He hated the gala and had retreated to his sanctuary an hour ago to handle international calls, leaving strict orders not to be disturbed. His personal bodyguards were stationed outside his oak doors, but if the intruders had the element of surprise, if they had an inside man who had bypassed the lower security, Vincent was a sitting duck. Vincent was a mark. Beatrice didn't hesitate anymore. She didn't go to the main stairs, where she would be stopped by security. She turned and sprinted toward the old Victorian dumbwaiter shafts and the narrow, winding spiral staircase meant for 19th century maids. Her lungs burned, and her legs ached under her weight as she hauled herself up 3 flights of stairs. Every step was agonizing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Too slow, her mind screamed. You're too slow. When she finally reached the 3rd-floor landing, the heavy silence of the private wing was terrifying. The thick Persian carpets absorbed the sound of her frantic footsteps. She rounded the corner toward Vincent's study. Her blood ran cold. The 2 heavily armed academy guards, stationed outside Vincent's door, were slumped against the wall, pools of dark crimson soaking into the carpet beneath them. The heavy oak doors to the study were cracked open. There was no gunfire, no shouting, just the terrifying, hushed sound of a predator cornering its prey. Beatrice crept toward the door, her heart threatening to crack her ribs, and peered through the 1-inch gap. Inside the dimly lit study, the atmosphere was suffocating. Vincent Castellano stood behind his massive mahogany desk. He had discarded his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. He looked utterly calm, though his jaw was clenched tight enough to shatter teeth. He was entirely unarmed. Standing opposite him were the 4 men from the kitchen. They had stripped off their white catering jackets to reveal black tactical gear underneath. 2 of them had suppressed Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine guns trained directly on Vincent's chest. But it was the 5th man in the room that made Beatrice's breath catch in her throat. He had apparently come in through the balcony doors. He was a towering, heavily scarred man, wearing a custom charcoal Zegna suit. His blonde hair was slicked back, and his pale blue eyes held a chilling, psychopathic amusement. Roman Ivanov. Vincent, 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 Roman purred, his heavy Russian accent curling around the syllables like barbed wire. You need better friends. Do you know how easy it was to buy your underboss? Paulie Gatto has expensive habits. $1 million, and he practically handed me the keys to your castle. Vincent didn't flinch. His dark eyes were fixed on Roman with lethal intensity. You think killing me in my own house changes anything, Roman? The Commission will have you butchered before you make it back to Brooklyn. The Commission will respect power, Roman laughed, taking a step closer, pulling a silver Glock 19 from his shoulder holster. They will respect the man who gutted the great Castellano in his own study. This city is mine now. Outside the door, Beatrice's mind raced. She had no weapon. She had no combat training. She was a maid. If she ran, she might make it out alive. She could sneak back down the stairs, slip out the back, and disappear. But as Roman raised the gun, aiming it squarely at the space between Vincent's eyes, something deep inside Beatrice snapped. A lifetime of being stepped on, of being ignored, of being told she was worthless and weak because of her size, ignited into a blinding, white-hot rage. Beside the doorframe sat a heavy, antique brass fireplace poker resting in a decorative iron stand. Beatrice didn't think. She grabbed the solid brass rod, it weighed at least 10 whole pounds, and shoved the heavy oak doors open with her shoulder. The doors banged violently against the walls. Every man in the room whipped around in shock. No one expected a 250-pound woman in a ruffled maid's apron to burst into a Mafia assassination. "Hey!" Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking like a whip. The closest Russian mercenary, startled by the sudden noise, swung his submachine gun toward her. Beatrice didn't stop moving. Using her entire body weight and the momentum of her charge, she swung the brass poker like a baseball bat. Crack! The heavy brass connected squarely with the mercenary's knee. The sickening sound of bone shattering echoed through the study. The man shrieked, his leg buckling instantly, and he collapsed to the floor, his weapon clattering across the mahogany planks. "What the hell is this?" Roman barked, momentary confusion breaking his icy demeanor. Another mercenary lunged at Beatrice. She tried to swing the poker again, but the man was too fast. He grabbed her uniform, hauling her forward and backhanding her across the face with brutal force. The impact sent Beatrice crashing into a side table. A porcelain lamp shattered around her. Her lip split open, the coppery taste of blood flooding her mouth. Dizzy and gasping, she tried to push herself up, her heavy frame struggling against the debris. Roman looked from the bleeding maid on the floor to Vincent, throwing his head back and letting out a cruel, booming laugh. This is your last line of defense, Vincent. A fat, sloppy pig of a maid. You've fallen even lower than I thought." Roman walked over to Beatrice. He reached down, grabbing a fistful of her thick, dark hair, and violently yanked her head back. Beatrice cried out in pain, dropping the poker. "Look at her," Roman sneered, pressing the cold barrel of the Glock against Beatrice's temple. He looked at Vincent with malicious glee. "Maybe I'll blow her brains out first. Let you watch your pathetic little staff bleed out on your expensive rugs." Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut. She could feel the cold steel against her skin. She could smell Roman's expensive cologne mixed with the metallic scent of gunpowder. "This is it," she thought. "I'm going to die here." But the gunshot never came. Instead, a sound ripped through the room that froze the blood in Beatrice's veins. It was a roar, feral, guttural, and vibrating with an apocalyptic fury. Vincent Castellano, the man who never raised his voice above a whisper, exploded. "Get your hands off her!" The sheer, terrifying volume of Vincent's voice made Roman instinctively flinch, his grip on Beatrice's hair loosening by a fraction of an inch. That fraction was all Vincent needed. In a blur of motion, Vincent vaulted across his mahogany desk. He didn't go for Roman. He dove for the dropped submachine gun of the man Beatrice had crippled. He hit the floor, scooped the weapon, and rolled. Before the remaining 2 standing mercenaries could adjust their aim, Vincent unleashed a devastating burst of fire. The suppressed MP5 coughed out a deadly rhythm. Pft, pft, pft. Both mercenaries dropped instantly, their chests shredded by the close-range crossfire. Roman, realizing the tactical advantage was gone, shoved Beatrice hard against the wall and raised his Glock toward Vincent. But Beatrice wasn't finished. As Roman shoved her, she blindly kicked out with her heavy, rubber-soled work shoe. Her foot connected violently with the side of Roman's knee. It wasn't enough to break it, but it knocked the Russian boss off balance just as he pulled the trigger. Roman's shot went wide, burying itself into the ceiling plaster. Vincent fired. A single round caught Roman in the shoulder, spinning the massive Russian around. Cursing in his native tongue, Roman stumbled toward the open balcony doors, clutching his bleeding arm. "Kill them!" Roman yelled to the crippled man on the floor, before throwing himself over the low stone balcony, crashing onto the canvas awning of the terrace below, and disappearing into the night. The room plunged into a suffocating silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded man with the shattered knee. Vincent didn't hesitate. He walked over and kicked the mercenary squarely in the temple, knocking him unconscious. The study was a war zone. Smoke hung in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of copper and the dust of shattered plaster. Vincent dropped the empty weapon. He didn't check the perimeter. He didn't call for backup. He turned entirely toward the corner of the room, where Beatrice was slumped against the wall. She was trembling violently, her chest heaving, her uniform torn and speckled with blood. A dark, ugly bruise was already forming on her cheek where she had been hit, and a cut on her lip was bleeding freely. She tried to pull her apron down, suddenly acutely aware of how disheveled and massive she must look, sprawled on the floor. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, paralyzing wave of shock. Vincent crossed the room in 2 long strides. He dropped to his knees right in front of her, not crouching, kneeling. The billionaire boss of the Castellano family, ruining a $5,000 suit in the blood and debris to get eye level with the maid. "Beatrice," he said. His voice was ragged, stripped of its usual icy control. He reached out, his hands hovering over her as if he was afraid touching her would break her. "Beatrice, look at me." She forced her eyes to meet his. His dark eyes were wide, flashing with an emotion she had never seen in him before. It wasn't coldness. It was pure, unadulterated terror. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice thick. "Did he shoot you?" "No," she gasped, her voice trembling. "No, I'm just—" Before she could finish, Vincent's hands gently framed her face. His thumbs, calloused from years of violence, carefully wiped away the blood trailing from her split lip. The touch was so tender, so completely at odds with the massacre around them, that Beatrice let out a broken sob. "You came up here," Vincent whispered, staring at her as if he was seeing a miracle. "Unarmed, against Russian hitters, for me." They had tactical boots," Beatrice stammered deliriously, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "The kitchen staff, they don't wear tactical boots." Vincent let out a breath that sounded half like a laugh, half like a choke. He didn't pull away. Instead, he slid his arms around her broad shoulders and pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face in her neck. He held her tight, his heart hammering wildly against hers. "You magnificent, beautiful woman," he breathed against her skin, the words sending a shock wave through her entire body. "I've got you. I swear to God, Beatrice, I've got you. Nobody is ever going to touch you again." In the ruins of the blood-soaked study, the invisible maid had finally been seen, and the Castellano family was about to go to war, not for territory, not for money, but for her. The wail of police sirens had not yet breached the heavy iron gates of the Oyster Bay estate, but the air inside was already vibrating with the chaotic aftermath of war. Vincent did not let Beatrice go. He kept one arm firmly anchored around her waist, pulling her substantial frame against his side as he navigated them out of the blood-splattered study. His other hand held a backup weapon he had retrieved from his desk safe, a matte black Sig Sauer P226. The hallway was swarming with the few academy guards Vincent still trusted, barking orders into their radios. When they saw their boss emerge, covered in plaster dust and blood, clinging to the plus-size maid as if she were the crown jewels, they froze. "Tommy!" Vincent roared, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. Thomas Giordano, Vincent's consigliere and oldest friend, emerged from the stairwell. Tommy was a sharp-featured man who wore bespoke Tom Ford suits and possessed a mind like a steel trap. He took one look at the scene, at the dead mercenaries, at Vincent's ruined state, and at the trembling, heavy-set woman tucked under the Doan's arm, and understood the gravity of the shift that had just occurred. "The perimeter is compromised," Tommy said, his eyes scanning Beatrice with calculating but respectful speed. "Local PD is 3 minutes out. We have a sanitized convoy at the South Service exit." "Clear the house," Vincent ordered, his grip on Beatrice tightening. "Leave the lawyers to deal with the cops. Find Paulie Gatto. If he resists, shoot him in the knees. But I want him alive." "Where are you going?" Tommy asked, falling into step beside them. "The Warren Street penthouse," Vincent replied. "No one knows about it except you. Pull the security feeds from the kitchen, Tommy. I want the faces of everyone who let those Russians through." They descended the back stairs. Beatrice's legs felt like lead. The adrenaline that had propelled her to swing the brass poker was rapidly vaporizing, leaving behind a cold, nauseating exhaustion. Her breathing was shallow, and the split on her lip throbbed with a dull, burning ache. She felt massive and clumsy, practically stumbling down the steps. But Vincent's arm was a band of iron, bearing her weight effortlessly. At the south exit, a fleet of armored Range Rover Sentinels sat idling, their heavy V8 engines purring in the damp night air. Vincent shoved the rear door of the lead vehicle open and practically lifted Beatrice inside, climbing in right behind her. "Drive," he snapped at the driver. As the heavy SUV tore down the winding driveway, leaving the flashing blue and red lights of the approaching police cruisers in the distance, the reality of the situation crashed down on Beatrice. She was sitting in the back of a bulletproof car with the head of the Castellano crime family. Her uniform was torn, exposing her pale, dimpled shoulder, and she was shivering uncontrollably. Vincent reached into the compartment behind the seats and pulled out a heavy, charcoal-grey, Loro Piana cashmere blanket. He draped it over her shoulders, his hands lingering near her collarbone. "You're in shock," he said softly, the lethal edge in his voice entirely gone, replaced by a dark, velvet warmth. I hit him," Beatrice whispered, staring blankly at her own hands. They were smeared with the mercenary's blood. "I broke his leg." "You saved my life, Beatrice," Vincent corrected, shifting closer to her on the leather seat. He didn't care about the blood. He took her trembling, calloused hands in his. "Roman Ivanov sent a kill squad into my inner sanctum, and the only thing that stopped them was you." "I'm just a maid," she choked out, a tear carving a clean path down her dust-covered cheek. "I clean the baseboards. I don't belong here." Vincent reached up, his thumb gently wiping the tear away. His dark eyes were intense, burning with an unwavering focus that made her breath hitch. "You belong exactly where I say you belong, and right now you belong with me. They saw your face, Beatrice. Roman knows who you are. If I let you go back to your apartment in Queens, you'll be dead before sunrise." The blunt truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She had no family left, no safety net, just a cramped one-bedroom apartment and a cat she had left extra food out for that morning. The drive to Manhattan was a blur of neon lights and rain-slicked asphalt. When they finally pulled into the subterranean parking garage of a sleek, ultra-luxury high-rise in Tribeca, Beatrice could barely walk. The penthouse was a sprawling, modern fortress of glass and dark wood, overlooking the Hudson River. It smelled of expensive cedar and emptiness. Vincent bypassed the living room entirely, leading her straight into the master suite and pushing open the doors to a massive, white marble bathroom. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to the edge of the sunken soaking tub. Beatrice obeyed, clutching the cashmere blanket around her large frame. She watched, bewildered, as Vincent stripped off his ruined suit jacket, tossing it carelessly onto the floor. He rolled up the sleeves of his blood-stained dress shirt, turned on the brushed gold faucets, and retrieved a first aid kit from beneath the vanity. "Mr. Castellano, you don't have to—" "Vincent," he interrupted smoothly, turning to face her. He stepped between her parted knees, dominating her space. "My name is Vincent." He opened a packet of antiseptic wipes. "I need to clean that cut on your face, Beatrice. And the bruise. You took a hard hit." Beatrice shrank back slightly, her deep-seated insecurities roaring to life. The harsh, bright lights of the bathroom illuminated every flaw she possessed. She was 250 pounds of soft flesh, bruised and battered, sweating in a torn maid's uniform. She was acutely aware of her double chin, her thick waist, the chafing of her thighs. Men like Vincent Castellano, billionaires who dated supermodels and actresses, did not touch women who looked like her unless it was an accident. "I can do it," she stammered, reaching for the wipe. "Please, I'm a mess. I'm too big, and I'm bleeding, and I ruin everything." Vincent caught her wrist. His grip was firm, halting her self-deprecating spiral instantly. "Stop," he commanded gently. He dropped to a crouch so he was looking up at her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Do you know what I saw when you burst through those doors tonight?" Beatrice shook her head, her lower lip trembling. "I saw a Valkyrie," Vincent said, his voice thick with a reverence that made her heart ache. "I saw a woman with more courage in her little finger than every made man in my organization. I don't care about the magazines, Beatrice. I don't care about the starving women in my world. Right now, looking at you, you are the most magnificent creature I have ever seen." He stood up slightly, cupping her jaw with one hand while he gently dabbed the antiseptic wipe against her split lip with the other. The alcohol stung, but Beatrice barely felt it. She was entirely consumed by the heat radiating from him, the absolute certainty in his eyes. He didn't look at her body with disgust. He looked at it like it was a shield that had protected him, like it was sacred. "Your uniform is ruined," Vincent murmured, his eyes dropping to the ripped collar. "I'm going to get you one of my shirts. Tomorrow, I'll have a stylist bring you a new wardrobe." "Vincent," she whispered his name for the first time, the syllables feeling heavy and forbidden on her tongue. "What happens now?" His jaw hardened, the ruthless Mafia boss briefly returning to the surface. "Now, I go to work, and I burn Roman Ivanov's world to the ground." The morning sun cast harsh, unforgiving shadows across the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Inside an abandoned shipping container, retrofitted with soundproofing foam and heavy iron chains, the stench of fear was palpable. Vincent Castellano stood near the rusted doors, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette. He wore a fresh black suit, a black tie, and leather gloves. Beside him stood Tommy Giordano, holding a silver briefcase, and two hulking enforcers from the Castellano payroll. Hanging from the ceiling by his wrists, his expensive Italian loafers barely scraping the concrete floor, was Paulie Gatto. Paulie's face was already a bruised, swollen mess. One of his eyes was swollen shut, and a steady stream of blood dripped from his broken nose, pooling on the floor beneath him. "Vincent, please," Paulie begged, his voice a wet, pathetic wheeze. "I swear to Christ I didn't know he was going to hit the house. Roman said he just wanted to steal the ledgers from the study. He said nobody would get hurt." Vincent took a slow, deliberate drag of his cigarette. He exhaled a plume of blue smoke, his face an emotionless mask. "You let armed Russians into my home, Paulie. You endangered my family. You endangered my staff." Vincent paused, the image of Beatrice bleeding on the floor flashing in his mind, fueling a rage so cold it burned. "You endangered her." "The fat maid?" Paulie sputtered, spitting blood. Desperation made him stupid. "Vinny, you're doing this over a maid? I've been loyal to your father for 20 years. Roman just offered to clear my gambling debts. It was business." Vincent didn't yell. He didn't lose his temper. He simply nodded to one of the enforcers. The enforcer stepped forward with a heavy iron wrench and swung it with brutal efficiency into Paulie's ribs. The sickening crack of bone was followed by a ragged, agonizing scream. "Where is Roman, Paulie?" Vincent asked quietly, stepping closer. "I don't know," Paulie sobbed, coughing up blood. "He operates out of a meat-packing plant in Hunts Point. But he won't be there now. He's paranoid. He'll go to ground." "He left a man behind in my study," Vincent stated, his eyes devoid of mercy. "A man with a shattered knee. My people had a chat with him before he succumbed to his injuries. He told us Roman has a fallback location in Brighton Beach, a heavily fortified nightclub." Paulie's eyes widened in terror. "If you know, why are you asking me?" "Because," Vincent said, dropping his cigarette to the concrete and crushing it under his heel. "I wanted to see if you still had enough respect for me to tell the truth. You don't." Vincent turned his back on the hanging man, walking toward the exit. "Tommy." "Yeah, boss." "Empty the clip. Dump him in the East River. Send his pinky finger to Roman's lieutenants with a message. Any man flying the Ivanov flag in my city is a dead man walking." Vincent stepped out of the shipping container and into the crisp morning air, just as the muffled sounds of suppressed gunfire echoed behind him. He didn't flinch. His mind was already miles away, calculating the war strategies, realigning his assets. But beneath the tactical planning, a singular, obsessive thought pulsed in his brain. Beatrice. When Vincent returned to the Tribeca penthouse a few hours later, the contrast between the blood-soaked docks and the serene, sun-lit apartment was staggering. He found Beatrice in the massive kitchen. She was wearing one of his white button-down shirts, the hem falling halfway down her thick thighs, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her dark hair was wet from a shower, curling naturally around her shoulders. She was at the stove, frying eggs and bacon, the comforting scent of domesticity filling the sterile luxury of the penthouse. Vincent stood in the doorway, quietly watching her. He felt the darkness of the morning peeling away just by looking at her. She moved with a surprising grace, her soft curves shifting beneath his oversized shirt. She turned, startled when she finally noticed him standing there. Her eyes immediately darted to his hands, checking for blood. He had washed meticulously before coming up, shedding his jacket and tie. "You're back," she breathed, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I told you I would be," Vincent said, walking slowly into the kitchen. He stopped mere inches from her, looking down at the plate of food. "You didn't have to cook, Beatrice. I can have anything in the city delivered." "I needed something to do with my hands," she admitted, looking down. "If I sit still, I keep seeing that gun pointed at my head." Vincent's jaw tightened. He reached out, his knuckles lightly grazing the soft, unbruised side of her cheek. "You're safe here. My best men are stationed in the lobby and the elevators." Beatrice leaned into his touch, a purely instinctual reaction that made Vincent's chest tighten. "Vincent, I know who you are. I know what you do. I've cleaned up after the meetings. I've heard the numbers. But what happened last night? It scared you, he finished for her. It made it real, she corrected softly, finally looking up into his dark eyes. And what scares me more is that I'm not running away from you. Vincent exhaled sharply. He stepped closer, crowding her gently against the marble kitchen island. His hands moved to her waist, his long fingers splaying over the generous curve of her hips. He didn't shy away from her size. He possessed it, his grip firm and possessive. "Don't ever run from me," he murmured, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear. "I spent 3 years watching you in my house, Beatrice. 3 years watching these arrogant plastic people treat you like a ghost, while I counted the minutes until you poured my coffee. You think this is sudden? I've been waiting for an excuse to tear you out of that uniform since the day I took over." Beatrice gasped, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. You noticed me." "I saw nothing but you," Vincent confessed fiercely, his hands riding up her back, pulling her plush body flush against his hard, muscular frame. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a claiming, a desperate, consuming kiss, fueled by adrenaline, violence, and years of suppressed longing. Beatrice made a soft sound in the back of her throat, her hands coming up to grip his broad shoulders. She tasted like mint and fear, and he tasted like black coffee and absolute power. For the first time in her life, Beatrice didn't feel too big. She felt perfectly anchored. The kiss deepened, the world outside the penthouse fading into irrelevance. But the illusion of peace was brutally shattered by the sharp, jarring ring of Vincent's encrypted cell phone resting on the counter. Vincent pulled back, his chest heaving, his eyes dark with frustration. He grabbed the phone. Only 3 people had this number. "Speak," he growled. The voice on the other end was distorted, heavy with a thick Russian accent. "Vincent," Roman Ivanov chuckled darkly. "You clean up your messes well. Gatto's finger was a nice touch. But you left something behind." Vincent's blood ran cold. "You have 24 hours to leave the country, Roman, or I will mount your head on my desk." "Big words for a man who cares so much about the help," Roman taunted. "Tell me, Vincent, does your fat little hero know about her sister in South Boston? Clara, isn't it? Works at a diner on D Street." Beatrice, standing close enough to hear the tinny voice from the speaker, went deathly pale. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the marble counter to steady herself. Clara, her estranged younger sister, the only family she had left in the world. "If you touch her," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a demonic, vibrating frequency, "I won't just kill you. I will flay you alive. Bring me the Castellano Union ledgers tonight, at the Red Hook terminal," Roman demanded. "Come alone, or Clara gets shipped to Moscow in pieces." The line went dead. Vincent slowly lowered the phone. He looked at Beatrice, whose eyes were wide with raw, unspeakable terror. The sanctuary had been breached, and the war had just become terrifyingly personal. The silence in the Tribeca penthouse was absolute, ringing with the echo of Roman's threat. Beatrice gripped the edge of the marble island so hard her knuckles turned white. Clara, her little sister, who was working double shifts at a greasy spoon in Boston just to pay for nursing school. Clara had nothing to do with this world. Vincent moved with terrifying mechanical precision. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He walked directly to a sleek biometric wall safe hidden behind a contemporary painting, pressing his thumb to the scanner. The heavy steel door hissed open, revealing an arsenal of matte black weaponry and stacks of banded cash. "Tommy," Vincent barked into his phone, tossing a loaded magazine onto the counter. "Roman has Clara. The meet is Red Hook tonight. I want every sniper we have on Nushing the Cranes. I want the perimeter sealed. Nobody breathes in that shipyard without my permission." "Vincent?" Beatrice's voice was a ragged whisper. She forced her legs to carry her across the kitchen. "I'm going with you." Vincent froze, his hand hovering over a Kevlar vest. He turned, his dark eyes instantly softening as they swept over her trembling frame, though his jaw remained rigid. "Absolutely not. You are staying here behind reinforced steel and 10 of my best men." "She is my sister," Beatrice yelled, the sheer volume surprising them both. The terrified Maid was gone, burned away by the white-hot instinct to protect her blood. "You don't know what Clara looks like. Roman will use decoys. He'll hide her in the container maze. You need someone who can spot her instantly." Vincent stepped into her space, gripping her upper arms. His touch was firm, grounding her. "Beatrice, it's going to be a slaughterhouse. I am not letting you anywhere near Roman Ivanov's crosshairs again." Beatrice stood her ground, her heavy chest heaving, tilting her chin up to meet his fierce glare. "I filed the real estate deeds for the shell company that owns Red Hook, Vincent. I know the blueprints. I know the maintenance tunnels underneath the shipping yards because I had to organize the contractor invoices for 3 years. You need me." Vincent stared at her, the realization washing over him. The invisible woman hadn't just cleaned his home. She had absorbed the very architecture of his empire. A dark, dangerous pride flared in his chest. He pulled her against him, kissing her forehead with desperate intensity. "You stay in the command vehicle with Tommy," Vincent ordered, his voice brokering no argument. "You don't step foot on the asphalt. Do you understand me?" Beatrice nodded, her throat tight. By midnight, the Red Hook terminal was swallowed by a thick, freezing fog rolling off the East River. The massive steel shipping containers loomed like a rusted dystopian labyrinth under the sickly yellow glow of halogen floodlights. Beatrice sat in the back of an armored mobile command center, a retrofitted black Sprinter van parked a quarter-mile from the designated drop zone. Tommy Giordano sat beside her, monitoring 6 different thermal imaging screens, fed by drones circling above the fog layer. Beatrice wore one of Vincent's heavy tactical jackets over her clothes, the ballistic nylon engulfing her large frame. Through the windshield, she watched Vincent walk alone into the open loading zone. He wore a long wool overcoat, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. He looked entirely unarmed. He looked like a king walking into his own execution. "3 vehicles approaching from the north gate," Tommy murmured into his headset, his fingers flying across a keyboard. "It's Roman." 3 black Cadillac Escalades tore through the fog, screeching to a halt in a semicircle 50 yards from Vincent. The doors slammed open, and a dozen Bratva enforcers poured out, assault rifles raised. Finally, Roman Ivanov stepped out of the center vehicle. He looked worse for wear. His arm was heavily bandaged beneath his coat, a souvenir from Vincent's bullet the night before. But his cruel, psychotic smile was firmly in place. From the back of the SUV, 2 men dragged a terrified, sobbing young woman onto the wet asphalt. "Clara," Beatrice choked out, pressing her hands against the van's window. Her sister's hands were zip-tied, her blonde hair matted with blood from a cut on her forehead. "Stay calm," Tommy said, his eyes glued to the thermal screens. "Vincent's got the angle. Do you have the ledgers, Castellano?" Roman's voice echoed across the empty yard, distorted by the dense fog. "Let the girl go, Roman," Vincent called back, his voice smooth, echoing with lethal calm. He pulled a thick, leather-bound book from his coat pocket and held it up. You get the books when she's walking away." Roman laughed, a sharp, grating sound. He grabbed Clara by the hair, pressing a pistol to her spine. "I think I'll take the books, and then I'll send the girl to your fat little maid in a box. Kill him!" Roman shoved Clara to the ground and turned to dive behind the SUV door. "Now," Vincent whispered into his lapel mic. The shipyard erupted. It wasn't a gunfight. It was an execution. High above the fog, Castellano snipers perched on the towering cargo cranes opened fire simultaneously. The synchronized crack of high-caliber rifles tore through the night. 6 of Roman's men dropped to the asphalt before they could even squeeze their triggers, their skulls shattered by invisible lead. Vincent didn't dive for cover. He drew his twin Sig Sauers from his shoulder holsters and sprinted straight into the chaos. Beatrice watched in breathless horror as Vincent became a reaper in the fog. He moved with terrifying fluidity, firing point-blank into the remaining Bratva guards who were scrambling blindly for cover. He didn't waste a single bullet. "Clara!" Beatrice screamed inside the van, watching her sister crawl desperately toward a stack of wooden pallets, caught in the crossfire. "We have a runner!" Tommy barked into the radio. "Roman is fleeing into Sector 4, the container maze." Vincent reached Clara, violently hauling her to her feet by the collar of her jacket and shoving her behind the thick steel of a forklift. He tapped his earpiece. "Secure the girl. I'm ending this." Vincent vanished into the rusted corridors of the shipping containers, hunting his prey. Inside the maze, the fog was impenetrable. Roman stumbled blindly, clutching his wounded arm, his breath tearing through his lungs. He rounded a corner, his pistol raised, only to find a dead end, a towering wall of locked steel doors. He spun around. Vincent stepped out of the mist, his gun leveled directly at Roman's chest. The Mafia boss looked like a demon summoned from the deep, his coat whipping in the freezing wind, his eyes hollow and dead. "Wait!" Roman gasped, dropping his weapon. The arrogance was finally gone, replaced by the raw, pathetic stench of survival. "Vincent, we can make a deal. I have offshore accounts. I can give you the Brighton Beach ports. You touched what is mine," Vincent said softly. He fired 3 times. Center mass. Roman's body slammed against the steel container behind him, sliding down to the wet pavement, dead before his eyes glazed over. Vincent stood over the body for a long moment, the roaring adrenaline slowly draining from his veins. The war was over. He holstered his weapon and turned his face toward the sky, letting the freezing rain wash the blood from his face. 6 months later, the private dining room of Il Mulino in Greenwich Village was completely silent. 10 of the most powerful capos and underbosses in the Castellano crime family sat around a long mahogany table, staring nervously at their untouched plates of veal marsala. The underworld had changed. The Ivanov Bratva was nothing but ash and memory, their territories absorbed into the Castellano Empire. Vincent had purged his own ranks, executing anyone with even a whisper of disloyalty following Pauligato's betrayal. The family was stronger, wealthier, and more terrifying than it had been in 3 generations. But it wasn't Vincent's ruthless expansion that had the Kapos sweating into their silk collars. It was the woman sitting at his right hand. The heavy oak doors opened, and Vincent Castellano walked in. The men instantly scrambled to their feet out of respect. Vincent didn't look at them. He extended his hand behind him. Beatrice walked into the room. The invisible maid was dead. In her place stood the Donna of the Castellano family. She was breathtaking. She wore a custom-tailored, deep emerald green gown that draped flawlessly over her curves, commanding the space she occupied. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant twist, and a blinding diamond choker rested against her collarbone. She had not lost a single pound, but the way she carried herself had entirely transformed. She moved with the lethal, heavy grace of a queen who knew exactly how much power she held. Vincent pulled out her chair at the head of the table. He waited until she was seated before taking his own place beside her. "Gentlemen," Vincent began, his voice barely above a whisper, sending a collective shiver down the spine of every hardened criminal in the room. "We are here to discuss the new union contracts in the garment district." One of the older capos, an old-school mafioso named Sal, cleared his throat nervously. "Boss, with all due respect, union negotiations are usually family business. Is it appropriate for, He trailed off, his eyes darting toward Beatrice. The room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Vincent leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Sal with murderous intent. Before Vincent could speak, Beatrice raised a single, perfectly manicured hand. Vincent stopped instantly, leaning back in his chair. The capos watched in stunned silence as the most dangerous man in New York deferred completely to the woman beside him. Beatrice looked at Sal. Her gaze was steady, unblinking, and chillingly familiar. It was the same look Vincent gave right before he destroyed someone. "The garment district contracts are bleeding 14% of their gross profit into dummy corporations controlled by the local councilmen," Beatrice said smoothly, her voice ringing clear and authoritative across the crystal glassware. "I've audited the ledgers. If we route the kickbacks through the concrete suppliers instead, we increase our net by $6 million a quarter and bypass the federal monitors." She picked up her wine glass, taking a slow sip. "Unless, of course, Sal, you prefer losing money because you're uncomfortable doing business with a woman?" Sal went pale, shaking his head rapidly. No, ma'am. The strategy is brilliant. We defer to you." "Good," Beatrice said, setting her glass down. "Then we begin tomorrow." The meeting concluded an hour later. The men filed out, bowing their heads respectfully, leaving Beatrice and Vincent alone in the dim, amber glow of the dining room. Vincent turned to her, a slow, devastating smirk spreading across his face. He reached out, his large hand gripping her thick thigh beneath the table, his thumb stroking the silk of her dress. "You terrified them," Vincent murmured, his voice thick with adoration and heat. Beatrice smiled, leaning into his touch. The phantom pains of her past, the insults, the invisibility, the suffocating fear of not being enough, were completely gone. She looked at the billionaire Mafia boss who had burned half the city down to keep her safe, the man who worshipped the very ground she walked on. "They should be terrified," Beatrice whispered back, resting her hand over his. "They used to think I was just part of the furniture." Vincent leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, claiming her with the same fierce, possessive desperation he had shown in the blood-soaked study. "They were blind," Vincent promised against her mouth. "But I see you, Valkyrie. I will always see you." The crystal chandelier above them flickered, but Beatrice no longer needed to hide in the shadows. She was exactly where she belonged, standing between the crossfire, holding the brass poker, and ruling the darkest corners of the city, perfectly, beautifully, unignorable. And that is the thrilling end to get your hands off her. Beatrice went from an invisible, overlooked maid to the undisputed queen of the Castellano syndicate, proving that true power isn't about fitting into society's narrow mold. It's about the courage to stand your ground. Vincent saw the fierce Valkyrie within her when no one else did, and together they built an unstoppable empire. If Beatrice and Vincent's gripping Mafia romance had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Share this video with your fellow dark romance lovers, and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on for more intense, true-to-life stories of power, betrayal, and unexpected love. What would you do if a mob boss fell for you? Tell us in the comments below.